I want to take a few minutes to talk about patents and these old knife patents and some of the neat stuff that you can find, if you dig into some of these old patents and actually read about it. But I took a few pictures of the tang of this knife. And so this is on the main blade. It says Schrade Cutco, Cutlery Company, Walden, New York. And then on the pin blade, it says U.S. Pats and has three patent dates. December 21st, '09. September 13, 10, June 6, and I was thinking this was 15. Here's another picture of it right here. But I think this was actually 16 because I tried to look these patents up and I found one for September 13, 10, which is this one, September 13, 1910, which does not look like the knife that we're looking at, but I'll get back to why this patent was referenced in a minute. And then June 6, 1915, or 16. That's why I say I think this is actually 16. And if you look at it back on this picture, it does kind of look like that 6 right there. And it may just be the way that it's stamped that made me think it was 15. But this patent here is June 6, 1916, and this does look like the knife that we're looking at. And now this other one, December 21st, 1909, I think that's actually a different, I couldn't find the patent on it, but I think it's actually a different style knife. But what you're going to see here in these patents is that some of these patents are not necessarily for complete knives, but for improvements on previous knives. And I think that's what we're seeing right here. So this June 6, 1916 is this one here, which is an improvement on this knife right here, which was probably an improvement on whatever patent this was right here. All right. So this knife right here, I think most closely represents, from a basic picture, the knife that we'll be working on. And so you got your safety, you got your button. This is a look on the inside. You can see the spring. You know, remember, as we're pushing down one side, the spring kind of rocked up on the other. And I think that's what we're seeing right here. And so this one was filed March 24th, 1915. I guess the patent was granted June 6, 1916. But what I wanted to go down here, at the risk of boring the viewer here, I find this stuff interesting. So if you don't, you can skip all this. But we're going to look at the reason for filing this patent. And so just come down here. I'll just read this opening introduction and then I'll move on. But it says, "Be it known that I, Jacob Lewis Schrade, a citizen of the United States and a resident of Walden in the county of Orange in the state of New York, have invented certain new and useful improvements in pocket knives, of which following is a specification." Now, one thing I want to talk about is who are the Schrade brothers, or who runs the Schrade company or whatever. And the best I could tell from just doing some basic research is that some of these knives, kind of the main inventor was George Schrade. So he seems to have been the inventor of these mechanisms and knives. And he went in business with his brother, Louis Jacob, and then also William. So like if you look at this patent, it's under JL, Jacob Lewis, and William Schrade. So this is 1910. If you look at this patent, which is 1916, is Louis Jacob. If you look at this patent, which is 1930, you got George. So George M. Schrade. And so you got Jacob Lewis on that one. You got George on this one. Now this is after George left and started his own company. And from what I was reading, around I forget exactly when it was, around I think 1910, maybe, George left to pursue other things. And he was an inventor of many different things. In fact, you can go to the Google patent website and patent search site and search for Schrade, George Schrade, and you can see different things that he invented. In fact, some of the stuff that I ran across was he invented a machine for for doing bolsters, fitting bolsters on knives. He invented a machine for cutting the pockets for the shields and all kinds of stuff. He invented a way to change soles, not soles on shoes, but heels on shoes, like a way to attach new heels. But anyway, all kinds of things. It's kind of interesting. Also, a center punch, so he's got a patent on improvements to center punch. I kind of fell down the patent rabbit hole looking at some of that stuff. But you see George there, and then this one over here, you see George on it as well. So this one goes back to 1917. And it's a different kind of automatic, but so he had that in 1907. But then when you get to some of these others that we're looking at, is Louis Jacob. And so I don't know if they just, different ones of them decided to patent it, but once we got past around 1930, anything after 1930 that got George's name on it is when he has ventured out by himself. However, some of these patents still reference other patents that may or may not be made by him. And that's kind of what I think we're seeing going on right here. All right, so let's get back to this one. So this was Jacob Louis Schrade. And he says, this invention pertains more particularly to a class of pocket knives having the means for locking the blade in its open and closed position and a spring for causing the closed blade to fly open when manually released from its locking means. So basically a switch blade. But this is what I want to get down to. Let's see, an example of a safety push button pocket knife of the character to which my invention is more especially applicable is illustrated in patent granted to J. L. and W. Schrade 969-909 dated September 13, 1910, and that's this one right here. Now, even though these this knife works mechanically, whoa, what's going on there? Works mechanically different than this knife, you'll see here why he's referencing this patent. Although other patents show modified forms of pocket knives belonging to the type of knife to which my invention relates, in the pocket knife shown in said patents September 13, 1910, and in all other pocket knives belonging to the same type known to me, and this is what's important here, and this is what I find interesting, there has existed a difficulty which it is the purpose of my invention to remedy, and which has not so far as I know been therefore or herefore corrected. In this type of knife, the inner edge of the back of the knife, in between the sides of the handle, has been substantially straight and flat, except for at the center where the said back has been slightly recessed to take a bend in the spring with a traverse rivet engaging said bend, and furthermore, the spring has been from the central rivet extended toward the ends of the knife handle on such lines as that the closing of the blade or blades the spring would by the rolling action of the tang of the blade against it be closed down against or closed to the inner straight edge of the back. Now, sorry for all that, but what he's saying here is that on this particular knife, so this is the spring. So remember how when we were looking at the actual knife, if you press down one side of the spring, the other side came up, and it's because it kind of rocked. And what he's saying here is he's basically laying out the way the spring works and saying that this piece here is flat and straight, and that causes an issue. All right, so let's see, where am I in my reading? Several difficulties have existed with respect to the knife construction as heretofore produced, and among them it may be mentioned that the spring has not had proper elastic action to ensure efficiency, and that by reason of the close proximity to the spring to the inner edge of the back, when the blade is closed in position, even slight obstruction, such as an accumulation of lint, dust, or the like from the pocket, getting in between the spring and the back has prevented the blade or blades from freely closing as far as proper and interferes with the action of the spring, the whole resulting in the knife mechanism having a harsh and improper action. Now, that's all I'm going to read about that. But basically what he's saying is that because there's no clearance in here, that if any pocket lint or dust or anything in there can get in, then it prevents the spring from operating correctly. So that's what this addresses. And so you can see here, this back, instead of being straight, it has a curvature to it both out near the end and on the inside here, so that any lint or dust might collect in there and but not interfere with the operation of the spring. Now remember me talking about this back is straight and it doesn't bend like a slip joint. I think I talked about that. So there's no pressure, against the tang like you would have with a slip joint. Basically, it's just a stop in the back here. But that leaves room for lint. And so that's what he is doing with this patent right here, what he's trying to achieve. Now, there's another problem that came about after these knives, I guess, went into production. And this is the problem that you saw when we deployed the knife, we opened it, and the blade flew open so fast that it bounced and kicked back. And it kicked back because there's no tension on the blade, on the tang or anything. It just hit this back piece and kicked back. And so they recognized this is an issue. I think both of the Schrade brothers, I say both, there's three of them, but the two of them that stuck together, and I think George also independently, and they set out to address this issue. Now, in this patent right here, and I'm not going to read this patent, I'm just going to talk about it, and then I might read some from the other one. But in this one right here, in order to remedy this, and so this patent was filed by George. So basically, he creates something in his knife that puts tension on the blade, and so that the blade, here's a zoom in, so the blade doesn't open and throw out there so freely. So you got a tensioner, you got something creating friction on the blade. And so this is what he patented. So this patent was in 1930. So this would be just after he started his own George Schrade Knife Company, split off from the Schrade Cutlery Company, I believe it was called, that they had formed earlier. But he did that. Then in 1932, Jacob Louis Schrade filed this patent to solve the same issue, but he solves it in a different way. And so I'll just go ahead and show you. Here's how he solves it. So there's a cut in the liner, and the liner is pushed over in a way that as the blade opens, it comes in contact with the liner and creates friction and slows the blade down. And then, so here's an example of it when the blade is open. So when it's open, the liner is pushed over, but when it's closed, the liner is kind of kicks over toward the blade. And so you see that in the on both ends. All right, let me read a little bit of this at the risk of boring everybody. So the present invention relates to pocket knives having means for locking the blade in the open and closed position and the spring for causing the closed blade to fly open when released from its locking means. Such knives have been generally known as safety push-button knives, an example of which is disclosed in U.S. letters patent number 1857725, issued to me on the date of 6th day of June, 1916. Now, that's this one right here. So he's saying there's a problem with this, with the knife that was issued the patent to me right here. In such knives, the blades are rather loosely mounted in order that the relatively light spring may throw them open to the fullest extent when the locking device is released by means of the push button. So remember in our demo where I was showing you the knife, how loose that blade was in there? So that's what he's talking about here. The said locking device not only holds the blade closed against the tension of the opening spring, but also holding rigid when fully open. And unlike ordinary pocket knives, there is no frictional engagement between the shank of the blades and the back of the knife, yielding resistance to opening and closing movement. And the movement of the blades to open in the closed position is unrestricted. The locking device serves only to lock them in the closed and open position. So basically what he's saying is on this knife, on the tang, you have this cutout on both sides. And so what he's saying is that there is no back spring, like in a slip joint, to create any kind of friction in either the open or the closed position. But the button, the sear on the button, I'm going to jump over here to this just to show you. So right here, here's an example of the button. And so the sear or the lever drops in when it's open or when it's closed. And that's what that's what he's referring to, that there's nothing, that this is sufficient to hold the blade open or closed, but there's nothing to keep the blade from, from bouncing back or putting any friction on it while it's moving through that position. Alrighty. As the blades are freely movable about their pivot, it frequently happens that when thrown open by the opening spring, the shoulder of the shank will strike the end of the knife back with force enough to cause the blade to recoil before the locking device can engage it. So remember me talking about if I can hit that button and pull my thumb off quick enough, then the lock will engage. But if not, what's happening is it's coming up here and it's hitting the back and then springing back in the open position. And this tendency to recoil is present to a greater extent with a smaller or lighter blade than with a heavier blades. And that's exactly what we saw, because the lighter blade came out so quickly, the spring under load, all of that stored energy just really threw that smaller blade open. An object of the invention, therefore, is to provide a friction device located in the path of the movement of the shank of the blade so as to be engaged thereby and exert frictional resistance to the opening movement at or about, and this is what I really like about this design, at or about the point where the blade approaches the limit of its opening movement. So, in other words, as the further the blade opens up, the more resistance is created by this. Now, you don't see that in this design because you have equal friction throughout the whole movement of the blade. So what's nice about this is that the back spring starts throwing the blade, and the inertia of the blade is going to carry it to open, but as it gets closer to opening, then this friction from this brake kicks in and slows it down. To prevent its recoil and to facilitate the engagement of the locking device therewith. A further object is to provide such a brake in which a frictional resistance to the movement of the blade will be gradually increased as the blade approaches the limit of its opening movement. I think I just reread that part. To the above ends, the present invention may be said to consist of a pocket knife of the character described provided with a frictional brake to engage the shank of the blade on its opening movement, and further of the devices and combinations of devices which will be hereinafter described and claimed. And so he goes on to talk about it, so that's all that we'll read about that. But I wanted to talk about that because when I open this knife up, I'm not sure if it's going to be like this. Well, I know it doesn't have the brake in it. And so in my attempt to recreate this knife, I'm planning on using this braking mechanism. Now, I thought about maybe even having this not pinned right here and having it loose and being like a slip joint that's light enough that the blade can be thrown and it can overcome the spring of the slip joint, but where the slip joint creates enough spring back or enough tension so that the blade doesn't kick back. But I think really what I'm going to do is go with this right here. All right, I want to take a look at one other patent here. And this is one that George filed in 1938 that was approved in 1940. And the reason that I want to look at this one is because this one shows more of the mechanics of the knife. So when we were looking at this one over here, it just showed, we could see the outside handle and we could see kind of an inside look, but we couldn't really see what was going on under the handle. And that's what we see in this one. And there's actually a good bit going in under the handle, and it's kind of difficult to interpret exactly what might be going on here, but I'm going to try to explain it. And I think that this is what it's going to look like when we get the handles off of the knife that I'm working on. All right, so you got your, we'll look at these two views here. You got your button, and attached to your button is what I'm just going to call a lever. It's got a pivot through it, and that's what we're seeing right here. And so when the button is raised, then the end of this lever goes into the blade. So there's this little cutout in the blade. We're looking at the blade from a side view, where over here we're looking at it top down. So this is the cutout on the blade. And so when the button's pressed this raises, it allows the blade to open or close, and then regardless of whether or not it's open or closed, this little lever would drop back in there. This little sear would drop back in there and lock the blade. Now behind the button you have a spring, so that's what this part is that comes down through here, and that's this. So this is a spring that's secured at this back end, and so it has a curve to it, so it curves up and gets under the button. And so this is another picture of it right here as well. Now behind the spring, so here's top down, so the spring is this right here, and it comes up like this, and then it goes back across, and that's what we're seeing right here. Now this piece is your safety, and this piece slides, it sits. All right, here's a picture of it out of the knife, but what's confusing about this is reversed. So if you pivoted this 180 degrees, that's how it would fit into here. And so you've got like where it's cut out right here, it corresponds to this cutout part right here. It's the opposite. And so what happens is this piece slides, when you slide it forward, it slides underneath the end of the button spring. So it's coming down, so you can see it slanting down here, and then it gets right here under that, which prevents the spring from going down, and then it comes back across. And so you can see here that's why that's 180 degrees opposite. Now the purpose in filing this patent is to speak of the lock itself, the safety itself, which is really confusing to me because it looks like there's one on there. So maybe the way that this one is designed is a little bit different than the way this one is designed. But again, the purpose of this particular patent was not to address the safety, so it wasn't mentioned, but rather to address the to address this area here for the lint. Now it just occurred to me, I have no idea if this is the case or not, but it could be that maybe later on he actually patented the safety aspect of it, but maybe not. But I just want to read a little bit about how this works. Now notice as we scroll down, this is a whole different looking knife and a different looking safety, and so that is the main purpose of this patent, was to address the safety. But what's really great about it is we do also get a look inside the knife at how the mechanics work under the handle. And so he says here, my invention relates to pocket knives of the automatic fly open blade type and compromise improvements on several knives of this type previously patented by me and operated by a push button which normally serves to lock the blade in the closed position and to release the blade when the push button is pressed in. The present invention is directed more particularly to means for locking the blade or blades in both open and closed position and against accidental opening, since I find that with some types of fly open blade knives, when carried in the pocket along with other articles such as keys, coins, and the like, the push button is liable to be pressed in a way to release the blade, which is liable to cause damage to clothing or injury to the wearer. So I really like that. And that's actually one of the issues that I've had when I started building lever action autos. And I talk about this some on some YouTube and Instagram videos and stuff about my lever action autos, that before I had a safety on it, I would put the button side, like this side, against my thigh, so that if I bumped something from the outside, it would not press the button in. Otherwise, it could deploy in your pocket. And so if you truly want to carry a pocket switchblade, you've got to have a way to lock that so that it doesn't come open. So anyway, I know that was a lot of stuff here, a lot of reading and all, but that's I just want to go over these patents. Like I say, I find them pretty interesting, and hopefully you will as well.